Aloha mai kākou, mahalo nui no ke ākoa ana mai ke hiahi. We're so honored to be able to host this really incredible event honoring Tutu Mary Kawena Pukui here at Mookini Library. My name is Anne-Marie Paikai. I am the Hawaiian Collection Librarian here at Mookini, and it's just such an incredible feeling to see all of you folks gathered here, community, students, faculty members, staff. I'm so grateful that you're all here. Mahalo nui Pele for having this space be the place to host this event. Just wanted to, before we get started with our panel, I just wanted to make a few announcements. If you haven't already, please do make sure you register up in the front in our lobby area. We have a few students and some tables there where you can register. After the event is you please do fill out our evaluation. We have QR codes on a few of our posters set up in the back of this area. So right back here, Hualania is back there being our Vanna with our QR code, mahalo nui. Please do fill one out. We do have dollar coins that we will be distributing for the folks that are able to do the evaluation. So please do make sure that to fill out that evaluation, use your QR code. If you don't have a smartphone and cannot do the QR code, please do go see the very nice folks up at the registration table. Other reminders, if you need to use the lua, it is right here, straight where I'm looking over here in the middle area. So feel free to use that. Our library will be closing today at 4 p.m. for general population. So at 3:45, we're going to have a little bit of a noise happening just to indicate to our patrons that we're closing. So please don't mind that. I think that's all of my announcements. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Amy Kalili, who's going to be our moderator for today. Mahalo again. We're so grateful you're here. Please enjoy.
Hi, aloha kako. Pele just motioned to me from her chair to say to let everyone know there's chairs right here. And there's some here in the front. For those of you who are standing, yeah, please come up, move up. There's some chairs here as well. Get cozy and we can have a great conversation this afternoon. Aloha kako, ovau no Amy Kalili. Elike me ka Anne-Marie ho'opuka kune nui ko'u mahalo. Ike ia wā ke kahi e hiki ke akoko me ke ia a kuka no ka hana ko'i a ke ia wahine Hawai'i aloha nui ia a keo aku me ke ia mau kanaka I ke ia la ka ho'owala'au na ho'i ala ko no ko lākou ike ke kahi ua launa ua hana me Pukui a ke kahi o lākou a pau he mau kanaka e ho'omau ana I kāna I waiho mai ai ka ho'oilina no ho'i a Mary Kawena Pukui ma ke kahi ano. No leila, me ke la nui ko'u aloha mahalo ke kahi ka hiki ke ho'ea I ane I me o ko'i ki ala. Hi everybody, my name is Amy Kalili. And like Anne-Marie shared, I'm also really privileged and stoked, basically, to be able to share time and space like this, to not only honor this icon of our history and our lahui as Hawai'i, and I think our place, Hawai'i in general, not just for kako kanaka Hawai'i, and what better opportunity to share time as well with these people, some who actually spent time, learned from, and all of them who continue the work, the important work that Mary Kawena Pukui did. Just, I am sure, for those of you that are here, you all have some familiarity with Mary Kawena Pukui, but just to set the tone and level set, I just wanted to read a bit of information that Pele shared with me on her. Mary Kawena Pukui was a titan in Hawaiian cultural preservation. She spent over 50 years documenting, translating, and compiling Hawaiian knowledge systems during a time when Hawaiian culture and traditions were being lost, thus producing a body of work that amounts to one of the most significant contributions to our understanding of Hawaiian culture today. Pukui worked at Bishop Museum while recording and documenting the largest library of oral histories of her time, and produced, as many of us know, seminal publications like the Hawaiian English Dictionary, Olelo no Eao, Hawaiian Proverbs and Poetical Sayings, Nana Ike Kumu, Look to the Source, place names of Hawaii, native planners in old Hawaii, their life, lore, environment, Ruling chiefs, Hawaiian poetry and music, the hula, the echo of our song, chants and poems of the Hawaiian people, and over 50 publications throughout her life, and posthumously as well. Pukui's unparalleled contributions to cultural revitalization encompass every facet of Hawaiian knowledge, practice, and existence, empowering the Hawaiian Renaissance of the 70s that provided the foundation for the continuing efforts to advance Kanaka identity and independence. 2025 marks the launch of Bishop Museum's ongoing Nana Ike Kumu program series, which seeks to engage practitioners, scholars, and students in the continuance of her tireless efforts to perpetuate Ike Kupuna for generations. And so without further delay, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we'll get started with discussion. We'll try to leave about 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the end for those of you who might have questions for the panelists as well. Our first panelist, more and more, is becoming referred to as the godfather of the Hawaiian language movement. And at the heart of Dr. Larry Kimura's lifelong work has always been his deep love and respect for kupuna and community. Like Mary Kawena Pukui, he has dedicated his life to capturing the voices, stories, and ike of native speakers. His ethnographic work, community leadership, and the foundation of organizations like Ahapuna Leo have kept the language and cultural practices of Hawaii alive and thriving. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Larry Kimura. Our next panelist is a renowned cultural historian and ethnographer who has spent nearly 5 decades listening to, learning from, and documenting the voices of Hawaii's kupuna. Born on Oahu but moving to Lanai as a teen, Kepa Malin was nurtured by elders who welcomed him into their homes and grounded him in the stories, values, and practices deeply rooted in our people and place. His lifelong work, often in partnership with his wahine aloha, Onaona, has centered on giving voice to Hawaii's people and landscapes. Together, they have conducted thousands of hours of oral histories, cultural resource studies, and ethnographic research, always guided by the words of kupuna and the importance of community. Whether as co-founders of Kumupono Associates, leading the establishment of the Lanai Culture and Heritage Center, or developing programs with Pulama Lanai, Kepa has remained dedicated to preserving and sharing Ike Kupuna. Please join me in welcoming Kepa Mali. Our final panelist is a scholar, composer, and advocate for community-rooted storytelling. Born and raised in Keaukaha, here on Hawaii Island, Halena Kapuni Reynolds' connection to place is central to both his life and scholarship. He is a product of the work of those like his fellow panelists, having been a Haumana Punanaleo and Kayapuni before earning dual degrees in anthropology and Hawaiian studies here at Hilo. He later completed a master's in anthropology at the University of Denver and is now completing his PhD in Wapuka! He completed Kalamai, his PhD in American Studies at UH Manoa. His dissertation focused on the mo'olelo of Keaukaha, the Aina Ho'opulapula or Hawaiian homelands community that raised and shaped him. Today, he serves as the first Native Hawaiian Associate Curator for Native Hawaiian History and Culture at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, while also contributing to broader efforts in the Pacific through the Hawaii Council for the Humanities and the Pacific Islands Humanities Network. Please join me in welcoming Halena Kapuni Reynolds. Dr. Halena Kapuni Reynolds. Oh, hello, fellas. Yes.
Okay. Before we get further in, I just want to say mahalo nui oko, kia hui ana. Amy asked if I wanted to say something. I said no, awale pono. But looking at, after having acknowledged our distinguished panel, as well as seeing my ohana in the audience, Make vale no foe mahalo I ka poe a po. No kia akua kua ana mai. and to acknowledge the ohana of Pukui. Some have traveled from Oahu to be here today. Every one of our kupuna who worked hard to teach us our traditions, and all those who sit on the stage here, and my mentors in the audience as well, some of the Kumu who have touched and continue to teach the things that she was able to document. He hana nui keia, a he mea e aluli ki ai kako. No leila, mahalo nui ki au ako koana mai. Mahalo pū I ka poe I ai I keia noho panela ana. Ina a ole, if I don't get to see you in person, please come up and aloha mai mahope. But on behalf of the Mary Kawena Pukui Cultural Preservation Society, as well as our ohana, mahalo nui for coming today and joining us. Aloha.
Hi, pals. I'm like, the worst when it comes to that. Okay, so in my humble opinion, the legacy of Mary Kawena Pukui runs deep and wide, but today we wanted to focus in on this notion or this understanding of ethnographic studies and the amazing work that she did in that area. And so, Kepa, out of the gates, in your words, in your experience, what is ethnography from a Hawaiian perspective? Well, what is it from any perspective, but particularly how that might differ from Western understandings of what ethnography is and ethnographic studies?
Ai, aloha mai kako, aloha. Kala mai au, ano na wali ku uleo, and ano hema wau. So namu haole wau kekahi, namu Hawai'i kekahi. But so we can all. I think of Tutu Kawena, who I was so blessed from. And it came because of Halau. Auntie Maiki took me in. And as we were preparing for Uniki, she said, I want you to go up to meet Tutu, who was going to be one of our sort of kupuna overseeing the Uniki. And that started a relationship that opened doors for me. I didn't know about ethnography. I graduated from Lanai High in elementary, barely, and didn't go to college, but I learned fairly quickly that, Tutu taught in so many sayings, he lohe keola, he kuli kamake. Yeah? Listen, you're going to have life. Kuli, maybe not. And there were things along here that ethnography is understanding the relationship, what we might call in a modern context, the cultural attachment that people share with their living environment. So, and I can say this because I'm unfortunately one of them. I stood at the wrong line at birth. But too many people look at our living landscape and see biology, natural earth sciences over here, and culture over there. For Hawaiians, it was all one family. And your tutu, right from Ka'u. Ho'okahi no ohana maiuka kahi, mai kahi pai a kahi pai. Everything is related from the uplands, all family, from the uplands to the depths of the sea, from one boundary to the next. If we change our worldview from a typical WASP view that always looks for the dot on the map, the biggest piles of stones and bones, those must be the most important things. What happens to all the people? One of the many sayings, one of the things that Tutu shared I was so blessed to spend almost a day a week. Kalamai. I hate talking. I hate talking on this particularly, but the idea is that Tutu said, all of these sayings, like another beautiful one, Iali'i no ke ali'i ke kanaka, yeah? Chief is a chief only because get people. So you see, can just focus on the biggest piles of this and that. Sometimes it's the relationship. And that is what's so integral about ethnography in Hawaii. It is a biocultural landscape. It is not earth sciences, natural over here. And biocultural includes the pele honua, all of these things, because that's a part of that living environment. Today, when you look at certain things, you find, oh, well, they say it's gone now. In our ethnography, we say no. Maybe it's just at a different layer. Yeah? Maybe uhi'ia nakapele. But it's still there. The mana is still there. So the ethnography is done humbly. Tutu folks always said, noi mua. Ask, pule mua. Pray first on it. Ask first. Don't just assume that it's your right. You know? So you learn, you ask, you humble yourself. You know, I think one of the things that I was blessed with is that I was so ashamed when I was like 19, 20 years old to go sit down at Huelani with Tutu Kawena. But it was just her and me. Most times Auntie Namaka was at work still yet. No one else was home. And so, you know, I was too ashamed to ask, can we record or can I write notes? So she taught me real quickly about how to write notes. And we look at the samples that she has in the HEN, Hawaiian Ethnological Notes, you know, and the work that she did for, got to be way more than 50 years at Bishop Museum, way more than that. You know, all the work that she did was just so important. But it's recognizing that there are many stories. And sorry, just on the ethnography, we go in humbly, we ask first. Mm-hmm. We remember. I began taking notes because of Tutu Kawena. I'd already kind of little bit on na'i with Tutu Papa Kadua Opeleko Puikima. You know, I knew the value of taking notes because the brain is like a sieve, right? But when you can start connecting things, when you can remember that there is this mo'olelo, this history, these connections of people. So Tutu always said, though, you know, I just think like nanai ke kumu. Okay? You look to the source. Remember there is more than one source, though. So there were times I was sitting with Tutu one day and she got a call. And so she took the phone call. And afterwards she told me, you know, she says, oh, these people, they think that, you know, I'm making any kind because, you know, I said this or I said that, you know. And she said, you know, when people like to namu a little bit, and again, this is the root of the ethnography, understanding. When they like talk stink a little bit, oh, her beautiful word was ha'ili. Si mapopo e ha'ili, ole, breathes pebbles. Yeah, talk stink, literally. Ha'ili, yeah? But she said, you know, kanue o ke kahibo e mamake lako e namu ha'ili. But she said, oh, wow. Kami reo wau me ku'uhoa ma Queen Liukalani Trust. E noho kaua ahana kau I ko kaua ana. We just go sit down and we do our work. We no worry about them. And like her own kupuna said, what was it? Nokapupuka kalili? Yeah? How's that for a good thing to remember? Jealousy is for the pupuka people. The ones who are not outside, maybe not pretty, the inside. So, you know, so anyway. And so we took those stories, we took those things, and she said, you know, Kopuna were such prolific writers. There is so much history, and the sad thing is that we see that for too long in ethnography, all other writers look just like me in some form or another, Ili, you know, and they all had the same story because they were coming with a Western world view, a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, whatevers, you know, or however it translates. And, you know, it just totally demonized, devalued. It cast aside the wealth of knowledge. And that's why I so much aloha that Tutu allowed me into her life for those period of time. And then with our ohana, you know, on the Pomeroy, these pili because that's la'iei kawai kapukui or pukui, married Pomeroy, you know. So we shared pilina, we shared familial connections. And she just said, you know, don't be shy. I asked her, Bea, hiki ia uke haku ike kahi mele ho? Can we create new mele? Ai, o na mele a pau, mea ho ike kahi manawa was new at some time. So create new, because that's going to be perpetuating practice. But she said, and I got to do this in Haole, she said, do it in a Hawaiian way.
Oh, yeah.
And take credit for your creation. If you create, no pass it off as, oh, Mea told me this and this, and this is how I learned that. She gave me an example of someone who was Pilina, and she said, you know, Kumu's Tutu and I were first cousins, and I never knew Tutu was a Kumu hula. But suddenly now, the Opio say, oh, my Tutu taught me all these things. So her lesson to me was take advantage of what you can learn and also take credit for that which you create. So the ethnography is diverse, it's rich, never enough, cannot just view it from a Haole side.
Oh, yeah.
And forgive me, I'm not being racist at all. We cannot view it from non-native eyes.
Yeah.
It has to be from that pilina, because you're ohana with the living environment. Everything around you is related. So I'm going to
Mahalo nui, Kepa, for all of the
bit.
insight. And one of the things, or a couple of times in what you shared, you referenced something that I want to pivot and go to Larry, if you will, Larry, which, so Kepa mahalo, right, for that affirmation that there is a difference, the way that these kinds of ethnographic studies are done through a Kawena Ike Hawai'i, or a Hawaiian perspective and a Hawaiian approach. And I think one of the things that you referenced in there was pilina. And so, Larry, I just wanted to ask you, I'm thinking specifically about all those years of your work with the Manaleo, Nakupuna, Makaleo Hawai'i, and anything that you learned, whether or not that's something you think that you perhaps saw in Kupuna, like Mary Kawena Pukui, but approaches to the lavena, if you will, of how you engage with people. As you're talking to them, perhaps from a Western perspective, you see them as subjects and you're trying to garner ike or information from them. But just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the how important it is, the how of engaging subjects when you're interviewing and speaking to them.
Mahalo for that big question. Yeah, mahalo for this opportunity to share. A little bit, because I first got to know Mrs. Pukui because of my grandmother. And I was graduating from Kamehameha at Kapalama in 1964. And my grandmother's coming for my graduation. But it happened at Kamehameha, Colonel Kent, boys' school president, we're boys' school, girls' school at that time, happened to hire a Hawaiian teacher who never taught Hawaiian in her life, but she was a native speaker. And that's Dorothy Kahananui. And she happened just to be there for my last 3 years of high school, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And in the last year, she brought in this huge Sony tape recorder, 7-inch reels, and she started to play it. And we were listening to this interview. I didn't know who she was back then, but I was so impressed. I asked Mrs. Kahananui, when my grandmother comes here, can this lady interview her? And she said, I'm sure we can ask her. So I can't remember exactly, but I know I called her, and I also went to her house personally. That was on Birch Street, where she lived there for a long time, because I remember when I finally drove my grandmother there, she was talking about how long she's been there. Anyway, she said, she was so nice, she said, and I tried in my humble Hawaiian to conduct myself in Hawaiian with her. And she was, of course, so pleasant and said, of course you can bring your tutu and we will interview her right here at my home. So when my grandmother came, I took her and they got along. It was at least a couple hours. I have the tape recording, and it's digitized now. So that's how I got to initially find out about Mrs. Pukui working at the Bishop Museum. Of course, I witnessed her doing the first interview firsthand with my own grandmother. And it's a small living room, so I kind of had to sit a little bit in the kitchen. And they were in the parlor. I remember Dodie coming in a little bit, and she was just a little girl at the time. But anyway, from there, I was definitely taken by the fact that I knew I wanted to have my grandmother recorded because I recognized before I was a senior in high school that these people were not going to be around for too long. And it was important to preserve as much as we could of their knowledge. I was thinking of knowledge that they knew culturally, but of course in Hawaiian, in the language. By then I was very much taken by Hawaiian language. I grew up, as I said this just in an interview today, I said, we used to go to cowboy and Indian shows, that was the popular kind of show back then. 10 cents for a ticket at our Waimea Theater in Waimea here on this island. And I used to cheer for the Indians because I thought they should be the winners. And so when we played outside in the yard, my brother's folks, they were the cowboys. I said, I'm going to be the Indians and I'm going to beat you guys. I just kind of knew that. And I've been dissecting that and taking that apart. How come I knew about that? I felt that from an early age. And, I was the only one in my family. And there's 4 of us, my 2 sisters and a brother. And, yeah, we all were raised the same way. But I guess, I'm glad that I got interested in Hawaiian at an early time. And when I took Hawaiian, I was also saying today, we started off with a full class because that was the first co-ed class at our boys' campus. By the time Mrs. Kananui finished her 3rd or 4th week, there were only 2 boys left. Not because she was a bad teacher, she was a strict teacher. But I enjoyed being taught by a strict teacher because, well, I just enjoyed the way she taught. And it was serious Hawaiian. And of course, I wanted to become fluent enough so I could go home and speak Hawaiian to my not only my grandmother, I had granduncles and grandaunts who were all Hawaiian speakers at home. So they became my teachers after I graduated from Kamehameha because the advisors couldn't tell me what university to go to learn Hawaiian. There's no such thing available at that time. And of course, as you folks all know, most of you here, that we never had a degree in Hawaiian until, I think, 1980. And then, thank goodness, it has come about that we go all the way up now to a PhD in Hawaiian. So anyway, coming back to interviewing, I noticed that the way Mrs. Pukui interviews is she doesn't ask necessarily direct questions, but she will say something to generate a topic, all kinds of things. And that's the way I try to do interviews. When I did the radio show on KCCN for 16 years, I had to ask immediately, however, which I told my students, this is not the way you conduct an interview with our people. You don't go directly to, can you introduce yourself? But I needed to do that for the radio audience to know who they're listening to right away. But that's not culturally appropriate, I guess, because I didn't see that. I never recognized that in the way Mrs. Pukui and just our people talking to each other as strangers to each other. And a very beautiful thing about the recognition of being, when I finally got to work at the Bishop Museum, I started here at Hilo College for 2 years. It was only a 2-year campus. Then I continued at Manoa. Here at Hilo, there are no Hawaiian classes. But I started to do interviews here. I interviewed Auntie Edith Kanakaole. I heard her on a 5-minute radio show here in Hilo, and she was just talking about Hawaiian stories, all in English. And I was in Kanilehua dorm, the only dorm, of course, that was here. Called her up after the radio show, and we started to talk in Hawaiian. She says, "Where are you?" I said, "Over here in Kanilehua." "Oh, Luca and I are coming to pick you up. We're going to go have dinner." So that's how I got to meet her, and I got to record her as well later on a tape recorder.
What do you think that was like? Why do
What?
you think she, in a short conversation, was willing to come ki'i
I
awa
guess she
ahele
was
ai
surprised
Milau?
to hear me speaking in Hawaiian to her. It was very rare. I know all my classmates, as I said, we ended up with just 2 boys, and the other boy, George Kaho'iwai, was a junior. And because there were only 2 of us, we had to walk up to Konia Girls' School to continue Hawaiian language class, because there were just so many boys left, only me and him in the class. There were about 6 or 7 girls left in the class after we started off with 30 students. Not because she was a bad teacher, very good. She never taught Hawaiian in her life, and Colonel Kent said to her, "Can you write a book?" And she did after 3 years. And she got interested in teaching Hawaiian, so she went back to Manoa campus to learn from other foreign language they call it foreign language back, Hawaiian was even a Hawaiian foreign language, to learn about second language acquisition, and she wrote a second book.
But so you think that your ability to connect with kupuna and community through their language was a fundamental kind of, maybe something that brought down barriers?
Barriers, you mean?
Just in comfortability. Like, back to my question about why Auntie Edith and Uncle Luca came and grabbed you. You said because you thought she was
I guess
surprised that you could aloha
I think
perhaps.
she heard in my inquiry and talking to her that I wanted to learn from her, and that and she could tell, and that because I was speaking as a young voice, not as a godfather or grandfather right now, and
as a young
just as
yeah.
So I think she was they were all very sympathetic, I guess, or very generous. And so, even when I started to, when I finally my grandmother never heard me speak Hawaiian when we were being raised. But when I got to be, ready enough, I was writing home to her in Hawaiian, and she would write back. We were corresponding. So she knew I was learning Hawaiian. So when we got home, I can't remember for summer or whatever, Christmas vacation, and I just started to talk to her in Hawaiian, and she just responded to me in Hawaiian, and we kept going like that. Of course, once in a while, she'd give me the right word or a little correction here, but nothing negative, so I was very fortunate. And she would tell all my aunties and granduncles and ke mo puna hiki ke walao kanaka, walao Hawaii, oko. So that's how I got to be. They were actually my teachers while I was attending here, because on weekends I'd go home and meet up with all of them and continue speaking, becoming better at speaking it. And that helps, this thing about approaching kupuna speakers and how to begin to have them respond positively. So that's all in that kind of interaction.
In that process.
Yeah.
Mahalo, Larry. Dr. Kapuni Reynolds, in the work that you're continuing to do as a young scholar, how critical has the work that Kawena Pukui did been to the work that you're doing? Whether that's the content of the repository, if you will, that she left, and or even some of the more purportedly esoteric things we're talking about the approaches to ethnographic studies from a Hawaiian lens? How have those impacted your work?
Mahalo for that question. Before I dive into it, in the spirit of Nana Ike Kumu, I want to recognize my Kumu, Larry and Kepa, both being Kumu in their own rights, as someone who taught me in our seminar, Papa Seminar. We actually learned hula, ke kahiona hula a Pukui, o na mele, no ka awa ililena o puna, that we had to then teach to Navajo students. And then through Kepa's work, really a model for how to put together these studies that are informed by Kawena Ike Hawai'i and not necessarily for somebody else. I'd also like to recognize my kumu here in anthropology and Kahakaula o Ke'elikolani for really providing that foundation and that cultivating that i'ini to continue this kind of work and seeing the importance of holding space and helping other people to understand the things that we do within our koleke and in our communities. And last but not least, to recognition of Ohana. Mahalo for bringing in Auntie Edith, because Uncle Luca is actually my great-grandfather's younger brother. He was William Kili'i Kanakaole Ioane from Kapapala Ka'u, and his father was Ioane Kanakaole, one of the few survivors of the 1868 mud flow. And so it's interesting because one of our kupuna Auntie Api, who was interviewed by Kale Langlis, another person who has done really amazing, incredible work with our communities, she talks about how Pukui, when she came to Ka'u, would come to Kapapala to see family, but specifically because there was still vauke growing in the gulches there. And she would come to gather so she could take back to Oahu. So that's just to say lots of different pilina that comes about in Ha'imo'olalo and in being able to talk to each other about our kupuna, their exploits and all the things that they did. But with regard to the question, when I started out my career here at UH Hilo as an anthropologist and in Hawaiian studies, one of the first texts that we read in the Hawaiian Ohana class was the Polynesian family system of Ka'u. And at that time, undergrad student, you're kind of just going through the text and doing the homework and, maybe I had a more superficial kind of understanding and comprehension of the text. But as I've gotten older, I've realized just how much that particular book and collaboration has informed so much of the cultural practices we see today. One of the sources that people go back to reconstruct culture, but then to also try to reintegrate those things back into the family. And I feel really blessed and fortunate to be someone with ties to Ka'u because it's a roadmap for our specific peoples on what life in Ka'u is like and the things we can do again to revive and pass that ike back to our descendants. With regards to the repository, as I continued my own education and being more introduced critically to the history of anthropology here in Hawaii, we know that Pukui's career at Bishop Museum was not necessarily all great, right? She had a lot of challenges dealing with the anthropologists and archaeologists. She worked at a time at the Bishop Museum that most folks will call kind of the golden days, which was the days of lots of research, lots of field work in different parts of the Pacific. And so at once, I would like to think that within the broader Hawaiian community, we saw and recognized the expertise she brought. But within the museum, there are stories from those of that time who would talk about some of the ways she was treated, maybe not being recognized fully for what she offered and what she did for some of the most important publications of the museum, fragments of Hawaiian history, the Kamakau text. Much of those translations were things that she helped to put together. And also just pulling all of this information that other folks then used in their ethnographic studies and anthropological work. So I really appreciate those who are there now, really trying to work to make those materials more accessible, but also to really give more prominence to all of the things that she did within the museum space. First, I'll talk a little bit about the kind of ethnographic archival records, and then I'll talk a little bit about the collections, because that's important. I luckily have been able to look at some of the materials in the Pukui archive. I actually haven't gone through the hand notes itself, but there's so many other of her notebooks that you can still access. And what I appreciate about those kind of texts is they really allow you and give you a sense of who Pukui was as a person. And because you can still see kind of her own criticisms or thoughts or comments that she's making as she's going through these texts, whereas the publications are a much more refined, edited version of those things. And it takes out a lot of that really important context. I remember going through one of these books and she made comments like, Kahunaism today is bosh. Or there was another one where she's talking about a kapu around the crater and how that has been kind of defiled because of the installation of restrooms. Recounting different practices of when you go to particular places and the ka'ina, the kind of repertoire of what you do to visit those places in a pono way. Those little tidbits in themselves reveal such larger stories of people being intimately connected to their environment, but also recognizing that you don't just show up without nothing, right? You have to be prepared. And so those bits and pieces of information, again, I guess you could say help us to really rehumanize Pukui as a scholar and as a person. She had her own opinions. She did a lot in community, and we do the same thing as people, right?
Absolutely.
The fact that, as you were sharing, the phone call she got, we still have people who namu namu all the time. But sometimes the namu namu is important, I think, for our generation to really listen and to see what is the pilikia and how do we resolve that, or at least create a space of dialogue as opposed to creating more division. And I think for me, that's something that I have thought a lot over my last 33 years of my life, because of just kind of the reality that we live in today, and even more in this current moment. With regards to collections, when I was doing my master's, I actually did an ethnographic study. It was looking at how Native Hawaiians and local collections managers at the Pauahi Bishop Museum and Lyman Museum care for ali'i collections. And I chose that topic because I was entering the museum field and I didn't really know what people were doing in museums that were from a Hawaiian perspective. But I knew Bishop had to be one of the sites because of Pukui's work there and the amount of Hawaiian staff that still work and care for collections. But during that time, it was when, I'll think of her name. One of the directors of ethnology at that time, I interviewed her and talked and wanted her to share more about her experiences of working with Pukui. And I remember her sharing that, when she talked with Pukui about, how do I handle these collections? What is appropriate? And she told her, the most important thing is that you work with these things with an open heart, that you're not bringing anything negative or to these collections that are our inheritance that come from these different places. Another story that I heard from staff was while she was there, in addition to her many hats that she had at Bishop Museum, she was also, there's a story around how she helped to make the collections noa, or to make them usable and touchable and things that people could use, because a lot of the things that are at Bishop Museum are kapu. And many people who visit those collections, even though she did this work, can still feel that. But it again speaks to who she was. She recognized that these were things that people came into the museum thinking, and was trying to be proactive about creating, dare I say, safe spaces, safe spiritual places for people to actually work with those materials, as opposed to being afraid of them. And I'll wrap up really quickly. So when we talk about the approach today, with the dissertation that I wrote, I actually tried to create my own theory of anthropology, even though it's in American studies. I was still really interested in anthropology and doing this kind of reconstruction work. And, in the Hawaiian dictionary, anthropology is under the label of huli kanaka. And so I wanted to really play with that meaning and tie back Pukui's legacy for the discipline and what it would look like if we were to center Pukui and other Hawaiian sources to then make sense of anthropology, as opposed to the other way around, which is typically how academia works. And in doing that intellectual labor, it gave me more appreciation for the lavena that Pukui's work kind of exhibits, but then also recognizing that the words huli and kanaka give us so many different kinds of meanings to make sense and to justify the kind of work that our students are really interested in. And I was thinking about that because I was a student in anthropology here at a time when there were many other Native Hawaiian students in the department at the same time. And we were in the department not because we wanted to be anthropologists per se, but because it was one of the other places other than Kahakaula where you could get Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture classes and the strong community-based archaeology approach. So I was trying to reckon with kind of these tensions within my own life, but then again, going back to those sources, Nana Ike Kumu, and re-theorizing them in a way that makes sense today, but also firmly grounds them in the present. Because I think that's one of the challenges of the discipline today. I think there's so much, academic culture today is very much, well, outside of Hilo, which is why I love Hilo here. But most of it is very competitive. It's about the tenure process and being able to publish as soon as you can. And that ka'ina, or that process, is not the same as producing knowledge for community. That is something that works and makes sense to community. So that's something that I hope to continue developing and learning in my own practice, is how do we continue to build on works like Kepa's, Kale's, Larry's, and to do it in a way that we're getting that ike and making it understandable again to community and bringing those sources together to then connect this beautiful lay of stories.
Yes. One of the things that, you're talking about this tension. So I wanted to come back to you, Kepa, because I know, because I've used a bunch of your work, thank you very much, that a lot of the studies and the research, the documentation that you do, the context that some of these things get used in, the reports, the impact statements, many times it's for issues that, good, bad, or otherwise, might be viewed as controversial in the community. And so, as you're doing your work, I'm just wondering if there is a process, like this internal kalaile that, maybe you and Onauna go through in terms of what and how much to divulge in the reporting and the recording that you do. Not, perhaps thinking about how it's going to be used and who's going to use it in the future.
Beautiful old saying to two folks, yeah? Pio ole ka oiaio. Yeah? You can't extinguish the truth. And that's where we work from on all of this, on these things. Like Kumu Lale was saying, or Kumu here, Halena, the idea is that it's with aloha. You always approach it with aloha, and that's how Tutu was with your grandmother, when Tutu Kawena and there was just no question, or when Auntie Edith, you talk about that kind of aloha. They didn't look at you and judge you, yeah? So they could sense you. And so this is the idea, is that how do we perpetuate that kind of ike, that knowledge, and remind people that the standard reading that we get today, the standard reading, and I won't mention all the non-native names that are the writers, but they are viewing it and assessing it from their world view. It must come from Ike Hawai'i. And I'm hema, okay? But Tutu Andlanai was born in 1890. Tutu Mamo in 1892. Their language was their language. Lale interviewed Tutu Mama, Adem, Tutu Papa Andlanai. They spoke the way they spoke. It may not be the way we all speak today. And sorry, I think I'm getting old timers, but this idea is too many things floating around in the brain, actually. This idea is that we bring it forward, we let them speak for themselves. And here's where I want to go. Any of you ever work in Mahele documents? Yeah? Mahele Kuleana, these land, Mahele land, Kuleana documents, stuff like that, and if you simply, and I say this with all humility because the people that worked at the Territorial Archives, State Archives, much brighter than I will ever be, but they adapted certain terminologies. If you go, just anyone that reads Hawaiian, you go look at what the Hawaiian says, and then you look at the translation that you can get for free at the archives, you're going to find they don't jive. So Onauna and I just finished a 3,000-page ethnography with partners for Lahaina post-fire. Just the Mahele Kuleana claims was 4,832 claims. We went through and gave, to the best of our ability, a verbatim translation of each one. And that was another thing. Tutu said, like you said, they didn't correct you, or maybe just a little bit, maybe this or that, But Tutu Kawena said, sometimes the ku'u, ko'u, na, ka, these things can be interchangeable sometimes. You don't need just rely on, but I think that's the haole, the dot on the map. Gotta mean only this. This is how you use it. I didn't get that from Tutu Kawena. She was filled with aloha, and just that she took the time. And I want to just maybe one thing when we're doing this ethnography stuff and when we're doing this, just because like we could sit with ohana, let's just say waimea na pu'u waikoloa, like that. One ohana, like your aunties under the Lindsay side, one knew why the piko went to Waiau, and the other knew about the story of your tutu Kahalelau Mamane and that name, but they didn't know, they didn't share the same, they had a different story from the same kupuna. So Tutu said, mai halo kie koha I ipuka, kuno oika ipuka kohale iho. Yeah? Don't go around peering and peeking into the doors of other people's homes. Just stand and speak from the door of your own house. So that's what we do. We want to help those voices that have been recorded. Hawaiians were such prolific writers. Bring those stories forward, and let the Hawaiians tell you the history. And then the challenge is for us, no matter what now, our lahui, is to absorb that knowledge and live it, respect it, no demonize, whatever's. Too much colonization.
I'll start by plugging another ethnography that they did that I hope is still at Basically Books, but it's called the History of the Hilo Yacht Club.
Sorry about that.
But no, it's called that because the yacht club paid for it. But it's really an ethno-historical study of Waiakea and Hononui. We're in Waiakea, so highly recommended if you just want to get a better understanding of even the Keaukaha coastline. And mahalo for putting that book together, because it provided me with the sources that I could then cite within my dissertation. But some of those sources, when we talk about not just working with standard readings and published texts, when we do this kind of work with community, it's really important to look at archives, to look at those primary sources that still exist today, especially that's publicly accessible, to then piece together the history of a place in a way that shows the ui of those areas again. For when I was growing up in Keaukaha, our main texts were Ku'uhomeo Keaukaha, which is an oral history that was kind of headed by one of our kupuna, Ria Akoi. And it's just kupuna stories about the coastline, but you have to really kind of connect their stories together to build a history of the community. And that's only the surface level, because they really only had like 2 to 3 pages each to tell their stories. But in looking at these different sources, in my lifetime, I learned more about different places along the coastline that there were kauhale. Most people that I've talked to in the past were like, they didn't really have a lot of people in Keaukaha, or there's not a lot of archaeological sites. And I'm literally at Keaukea seeing a heiau ho'olui'a that's still there, found the name in Pukui's place name list. And so, we're in this moment where we're trying to kind of build more ono again for these places to help with restoration, but then to also let people know that, I mean, Keoka has this one small place, but every site had a name. Every 200 feet, something had a place name with a story with it, with ohana tied to those places. And so I really mahalo these kind of legacies that were left to us, because they help us to better understand the landscape and the kupuna that came before us. And that is something that I mahalo my kupuna for teaching me. I was blessed to be able to be raised by my grandparents along with my parents. But understanding that even, you know, my grandmother never spoke Hawaiian. She knew Hawaiian words from her parents, but trying to recognize the practice that persists beyond the surface level, right? My grandma would always eat with her hands certain things. For me, that was like, that's an ohana practice that she learned. Thinking about stories of going to Kapapala and getting lei from her grandmother and how happy she was to see her children. You know, all of these little tidbits that we get from so many of our ohana help us to trace back to these practices that we can, well, that we need to bring back and to revitalize within our own ohana spaces.
Yeah, mahalo nui. Larry, just we're coming to the end of our time. We'll still go to the audience for at least a couple questions, if that's okay, pals. Larry, just listening to the conversation, and especially on the heels of Halana sharing what he's sharing, and the years that you've been doing the work that you're doing, and the fact that you're still a Kumu, Larry, do you have words of wisdom for future generations of Native Hawaiian ethnographers, and or words of encouragement for future generations to continue to have this ono, to do this kind of work, to seek out this knowledge? Mao mana'o a'o a'o, Larry.
I guess we can still go and find more information, but is this on? Yeah, there we go. And yeah, but there's so much material that Mrs. Pukui especially has gathered, collected, put together. So I'm going to say we have all of that, and that's foundational, I think, to what's to evolve, you know, as time goes on. But we should not forget all about that kind of data and information, and learn how to use it in various ways, because nowadays you cannot just say, go listen to a tape for half an hour or even 1 hour, or our radio programs went for 90 minutes. I thought they were very interesting, but if you told somebody, you know, a young person, especially learners of Hawaiian today, are mostly young people, we have to, you know, get involved with how to begin to use this beautiful information, value all of this treasures in a way that can be applicable, comprehensible to a new way of living today, and yet always give back to our place here in Hawaii, because we say aloha aina because we love our land. But we want our land to be Aina Aloha, our beloved place still. And this kind of information from our kupuna, and I would like to prioritize in our language especially, because I sense that the information that comes from people who are speaking our language is primary information, primary. So we have that. Not only in writing, we have audio. I heard some concern about, yes, let's use some of this material that Mrs. Pukui recorded. And I was talking today, or showing somebody today, I have my niece here. This is her grand uncle. One of Mrs. Pukui's favorite persons to talk to, besides Uncle Willie Meineke in Ka'u, was Kin In, Herbert Kin In, Ku'umi. And he and her are talking, and he's saying right here, openly, look, I'm glad you're recording this, you and I recording. Why? Because for our future generations, they will not know about this. To me, that's better than signing a piece of paper with a pen and say, I agree. But of course, we have to deal with new generations now, and they're going to say, that's my great-grandfather. Who gave you permission, or something like that? Then people get hesitant about it. But the person who is giving it with his whole heart and soul for the future generations. So I think we have some chore at the Bishop Museum, especially. Go listen and hear what they say, especially at the beginning of these interviews. Or at the end, especially, Mrs. Pukui would say, the reason we're doing this is for the sake of the new generations to come, so they will learn. And especially in those times, in those years, there's a tremendous gap. You know, I look at my own mother, for example, who spoke Hawaiian, but she never spoke it to us. And yet her parents all spoke Hawaiian too. So, you know, somehow there's some, well, we all talk about the laws and the changes and all, but still that contributed for us to become more into English speaking. And this, when you speak in Hawaiian, there's totally a different understanding of our place than if we speak in another language. So that's the kind of information I think that still exists for us, tons of it to be used. I would prioritize that.
Oh yeah. Mahalo nui,
Mahalo.
Larry. Mahalo.
Kalamai. I know this one thing, and it's so important on this, because just go to place names. One day we're sitting with Tutu Kawena, and I don't know why she brought it up, but she says she's talking about place names of Hawai'i, the later versions, and she says, you know, I almost pulled all of my information out of place names because they chose to translate ki lau wea. So they said, well, ki lau wea, that must be what it means. Finally, they came to an agreement, interpretive, for those which we might posit, this is a potential meaning, or literal, because there was a very specific story about it. And Tutu, you know, she said this was so important to her because those place names are the treasures. They identify, as you mentioned, you know, you don't need to go 200 feet. You can walk 2 feet over and get a new place name. And then we get something like, sorry, I hope his relative isn't here, but Thurston's Lava Tube, you know, Kalua Iki or Nahuku. Those are beautiful names that belong to that place. Why desecrate it with something else? The Baga never discovered them in 1913.
Oh yeah.
The Hawaiians knew it before that. You know, so Tutu, though, she said, if you look at our studies, you know, we'll always have a section on place names because Onauna is very strong about the importance of our place names and being those things that tell us about place. Ha'iwale, inoho mana'o, you know, whatever's, you know, these kinds of things that they get, you know, these different stories that they get. It was just, I wanted to call it that, or maybe it's recalling an event, you know, that occurred. Look at the whole Ohana name, Tutu's whole name. Inoho mana'o, but it honors their akua and their relationship with place. So speak the place names, use them, but we will be very careful in any of our work. We will say this is a literal, or here's ke kumu ihea'ai, the reason it is called this. Or we will say it could be this based on these facets of history. Those are one of the big things that I did take away from Tutu about making sure that, you know, we pass this ike on. So kala mai inahewa yana hui kala.
Mahalo. We have come to the end of our time, but we're not running away. But I did want to leave a few minutes if there are any questions from the audience. We can take a couple of questions before we let our esteemed panelists get away from us. If I was in the audience, I'd take advantage of this opportunity. I'm just saying, does anybody have any questions? Ninao, Manao. Uahiki no.
Oye, aliwai olelo aha. Hiki kia behe mai no ko huakai ana ma kia mokupuni me tutu Kawena hea hakela.
I Lolela.
So I'm going to just repeat the question. Not just because it was Maka Hawai'i, but for the recording purposes. Larry didn't speak to it, and I didn't ask him, which is probably why. Kalame Ya'u, but Pele asked if Larry could speak to his times of huaka'ing, if you will, or journeying around this mokopuni with Mary Kawena Pukui. Larry?
Yeah, I was lucky in my last year at Manoa to work, to be offered work at the Bishop Museum with Eleanor Williamson in the recording room, where all the recordings were being archived. And so one day Eleanor said, Mrs. Pukui is asking you know kupuna on this island who have not been recorded. If you could plan a 3-day weekend to come here. And so that's how I got to actually, this was in 1969. I think this was probably her last so-called field trip to do interviews. So with people like Sam Leah from Waipio Valley and John Thomas and over in Kauai High, we had William Akau, just all these people. And it was, I remember 3 nights because we stayed at 3 different places. The first night was down at Pani'au with Mrs. I was going to say Lo. She's not a Lo. She married now. Who is this now? Ruddle. Yes, Mrs. Ruddle. But she was always so into her Lo family. But we spent our first night there, and then our second night was at Hulihe Palace when Mrs. Iolani was there, Iolani Luahine, but she did not become because we had a special dinner. Mrs. Montgomery was the localia. I remember I had to mix the big kelamania with poi for that night because you had to serve it. And she's telling me, come on, Larry, you got to put your hand in there. You got to go. Anyway, it was just a beautiful trip. And our final, we stayed at Uncle Willie's house in Waiohinu in the last evening. But going at each place to interview Kupuna, who she hadn't gotten to talk to. So that was a beautiful, beautiful experience. Many little things, big things that were happening as we were traveling. And I remember, like when we were at Uncle Willie's house, his popohau, what do you call that flower? That hydrangea. Yeah. Hydrangea, they're all blooming. And so I just found, I don't know what kind of fern it was. It was palapala. Anyway, made a fast because Mrs. Ha'ani'o from Keoho had that evening at Hulihe had presented her with a beautiful lauhala hat. And I saw the popohau at Uncle Willie's house make this lei for her, and I said it was kind of pupuka ke ile wal au kanaka no me ale he pupu ka lei kawi kapali, and that's from her Olelo no Eau book, her famous sayings book, her proverb book. That the I guess how do you say this translation? The lei may look not so well made, etc. But when you put it on, it becomes beautiful. So you put it on her hat. And that was a beautiful thing. I remember all kinds of beautiful things as we drove into Ka'u, and she started to oli to piano ahiahi he mele kahiko pahakela. All of these beautiful memories with Mrs. Pukui. I can't recall exactly. She was getting a little older at that time, but not quite. But I don't think she continued going into the field, which she started to do into from the early 60s probably, or even before, when the tape recorder was finally become, how do I say, something that the public could use. I think the Army was using it most of the time, and then it came into public use in the early 50s. If I have to do some, anyway, that's my understanding of reel-to-reel tape recorders. This is after wax cylinders and stuff that the Bishop Museum also has. All kinds of recordings. So, yeah, that was a beautiful, and the experience at working at the museum was also a magical thing. Of course, I had some keys that I could come in on weekends because I'd say, Eleanor, they close up this working area. We worked in the back part of the museum. She said, don't worry, Larry, I can lend you a key. You can come in and use. So I could get in and listen. I just love to listen to all of those recordings. I learned a lot listening to all of them. Yeah, so I was privileged, very much so. Thank you.
Mahalo, Larry, for sharing those experiences. Anyone else in the audience have a question for anyone?
I just want to mahalo you guys because adjacent, as somebody who's not in Olelo Hawai'i that lucky, and I raised Molokai, but I spent a lot of time in genealogy with Hawaiians who are in the diaspora. And so we use a lot of these records that you talk about, and even just coming here, because you guys get medical facilities and claims and Molokai is still it, not coming over here, like I've read your guys' work, Kepa, for some work you did in H2P with Lanel Dam. I read the report and just like, I think we crossed paths at Lapili Ohana for Keokaha, and I know your kupuna, like we like Kanikapila, all this kind, and they have so many stories, and you can guide or think, because I always served in genealogy, and we're like just trying to capture their stories, and they are not Manaleo, their parents were. And these are people who are 70s and 80s years old, and it's still so vital. And they still are so oiwi, like, your people down there, I love them so much. And just like, I think their stories are the same like how when I was on the continent, I listened to Kaleo Hawai'i. Oh my gosh, like so rich, make you feel not lonely. But just like, how do we continue to capture our people's stories? And a lot of them are not speakers, but yet we learn so much. And like what you said, like sometimes the language different, each Manaleo, they have still dialects from different areas. So it's like trying not to, like, what do we know when we take college classes? No, it's necessary, but what do we know? Just like, I just want to mahalo you, but how do we encourage the capturing of this, of the living who are here? And, our Apana Ikalisia, I think, you know what I'm talking about. They just started a Pukimonomona Makolelo Hawai'i, and this is good, and they made it all levels. And because it's for them, it's one way they connect their two things, their Mana'ohi'o and then their heritage. And just like trying to make them not feel hula about the language. It's like, how do we, like, any thoughts about that?
I'm just gonna try my best to recapture summarize the question. And mahalo nui for acknowledging the value, I think, of what we've been talking about in the repositories and all the things that those of you have worked on, and of course Mary Kawena Pukui's work, a lot of which, to Larry's mana'o, is rooted in and extremely valuable because of the fact that it was done in and through Olelo Hawai'i, and there are momi, literally gems in there, to be cultivated and used for future generations through that Olelo Hawai'i. But I think the question is also, how do we continue to encourage the capturing of stories for those who may not be fluent and who have stories to share and ike to share, but might not be maka'olelo Hawai'i?
Mahalo for that really important question. I'll try to answer again. First, I'll answer it in the context of doing this in your own ohana, and then the context of if you're doing it for a project or paid work. Within the ohana, and this is for everybody, do not wait to schedule or talk story with your kupuna. So many people have stories of, oh, I should have talked to them, or I should have recorded this when I had the chance. Do it now. Bring out your phone, press the record, let them know, and just start having a conversation with them. The best stories are the unstructured interviews. And when every time I use the word talk story, I actually think talk circle. Like that's the imagery that comes to mind, because it starts here and then they'll jump here and then they'll jump to like 5 other points and then get back to the main point. But that is part of how we tell these different stories. And for people today, I mean, we have so many apps and things that you can just press record, transcribe. Like it's much more efficient. Not like the days of having to use the pedal to backtrack and then transcribe and backtrack again.
No can beat that one.
Yes, yes, that too, right? AI does not get the olelo correctly, but just when you over Tutu's house, start those talk stories, record, keep that for your records, transcribe it if you can, share it with ohana, because when they're gone and when your mo'opuna are looking for these stories, you have something to refer back to. And that's something that I did with my grandma. I mean, I would hang out with her in her bedroom and just sit on the bed with her. And then I had my computer and I'd just press record and I'd ask her about growing up, who her parents were and her stories. And like, as you keep asking them these questions, they reveal more, especially when they're comfortable with you. And the most exciting moments for me was when my grandma would talk about, would actually talk about the words she remembered. Like she always I remember her talking about how when they stayed in Kapapala, because there was no electricity, that they would have the kukui helepo. And that was the word she used. I was like, oh my God, like she's talking about lanterns. She didn't use the word lantern, but like in those little moments, you really get to see the things that they retained from their kupuna. And then those conversations also help you to better understand like the larger ohana network, and sometimes the hihia and why so-and-so no talk to so-and-so. Like those are all important for descendants to know who want to reconnect.
Absolutely.
In the context of kind of professional work, it's always important to be very clear with the people you're talking to about what this is being used for, where that information is going to live after the interview, and how you're going to get that back to the community. It is not meant to be something that you do it one time and you get permission that one time and then you keep using it. No. You have to respect that is their intellectual property. And it's about the pilina, right? It goes back to making sure you're cultivating that relationship with the people you're talking to and making sure that you're doing pono by them.
Mahalo nui. Okay, one more. Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, right here and then right there and then Paul. Maybe. Okay, go ahead.
When I was a freshman here at Hilo, I was looking at this documentary for my final Hana class. He was up playing three famous Hawaiian women such as Tutu Pukui, Ate Edwin, and Yolani Hine. I was wondering, what is your experience with them if you ever worked with them?
The question was about experiences with other kupuna and wahine that were, these. So I was at the right place at the right time. We get to Kawena. I knew Auntie Iolani Luahine, spent time with her at Napo, Auntie Lokalia, Auntie Alice. These are the people, or Tutu Papa Nui Makaneki Ka'ohelauli'i from Ni'ihau. These are amazing people. And all you do is, I think it's really, they get a sense like Abraham Moses, good Hawaiian name, yeah? His tutu were Kaho'o Kaumaha, but because of the biblical, they change it to Moses to make it more Christian. And, but they said, it's how you approach. they get a sense, if you get mana, if they feel something inside you, they're going open the door. And other times, you can just say aloha de aloha, and not to ask. And the questions, you can always go back. If you go into an oral history, and it's so right, you folks, you got to go to ohana. If you're not recording your own family stories, you're in trouble. Okay, but the idea is you can't go in like a legal, I've got a list of 50 questions, interrogatory. I'm not going into court here. So, you've got to be bright enough and know the subject matter well enough to ask the question and know that all these other touch points are going to come up.
Yep.
And if you didn't quite get the answer you're going to, you got to be bright enough. The kuleana's on you then as the interviewer. Go back, earlier we was talking about. Did you? And sometimes they're going to say, do they know about the pa'ilina? They may say, yes, but. And they're going to tell you why, but this is not. Oh, no, I don't know. And, you might revisit one other time. So, you give them the chance to share what they want to.
Right.
Yeah? You open the door, and you know that you're receptive to it.
Oh, yeah.
And they get the feeling. So, I think kind of.
Mahalo. Larry, he mama na ko no kela mo vahine ko na ihapa meni.
You were asking about Iolani and Lokalia and
Yolani and Edith.
And to Edith. There were just beautiful experiences. I remember because the Huli'e College, what do you call the not caretaker? What do you call the official person, custodian or whatever of curator. Lokalia, there's only 2 bedrooms, so she has her bedroom. So that evening, after the pa'ina and everything, there's just the other bedroom. And they wanted me to sleep on the pune'e. There's a pune'e and a bed. So Mrs. Pukui is on the bed. And Iolani says, no, I will not sleep on that pune'e. I'm sleeping on the floor because it's good for my back. And, they stayed up late. I know they were just talking. She and Mrs. Pukui. Mrs. Pukui was getting a little tired, but they were talking because of, Mrs. Pukui was a Kumu to Iolani as well in teaching her hula. So they were talking about hula. I remember when Mrs. Pukui had, put on her clothes to come out from the bedroom because the pa'ina was in the living room. Iolani started to just hit on us. They didn't have the ipu. So she started to play this, like an ipu on the floor to make Mrs. Pukui did some hula. I can't recall which hula it was, hula kahiko. Just because they were having a social get-together. It was to recall and have fun and, make these ties together. It was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. And then there were other kupuna who were invited to be a part of the pa'ina for that evening. So those are very memorable times to have had that. As I said, if they're calling me the Godfather now, you just have to be around long enough, I guess. Have to been there before, right? and just happen to have that opportunity. So like you're talking about now, if you can record, somebody that you want to keep, to have that, and because it can be enriching for your life, or if it's just for your ohana or whatever, you should do it. Yes.
Mahalo nui a oe, Larry. And I was reminded the evening is not done once we wrap up in here. We're going to puka iwaho for some kanikapila and hula. And so for those of you who still have questions, want to talk story with our panelists, please hang around and feel free to approach them throughout the evening. But before we wrap up, I just, again, would all of you join me in thanking and showing our sincere mahalo and aloha for our panelists, Dr. Larry Kimura.
Just to add to what Amy's saying, if anyone has any particular questions around the coin process, you can ask me about that because I helped to facilitate that process with the mint. So yeah, direct those questions to me. But thank you again.
Yes, and mahalo nui again to all of our panelists, Dr. Larry Kimura, Dr. Helena Kapuni Reynolds, and Kepa Mali. Just a couple of reminders, everybody, because he brought up the coin, please don't forget to do the survey. Where is that QR code? Okay, so yep. The QR code is on the sign over there. Please, 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 everyone, fill out this survey. And for those of you who don't have a smartphone or some device that you can do it that way, please grab those on the way out. We also I wanted to take an opportunity to mahalo all of the partners that made this possible. Again, for Kipuka, Native Hawaiian Student Services, mahalo nui ya oko. Again, the Kawena Pukui Cultural Preservation Society, Hilo, and most especially our Mookini Library staff, mahalo nui ya oko, Anne-Marie, and Kanayo Kana of Kamehameha Schools. Thank you again, all of you, for coming this evening.